am Jeff Land, and my wife and I are the parents of 4 fun and active sons. Abby and I realized early on that the circus will get out of control if we don't establish some firm rules and boundaries. And while we feel pretty good about many of our decisions in our home, we still struggle. One of the areas that we struggle is the use of electronics. Someone is always asking for an app, and I'm constantly second guessing what to do. Our world is changing so quickly, and the stress of keeping our kids safe can feel overwhelming at times. This extends to so many areas past electronics. I recently sat down with my friend Charity Gwaltney and chatted with her about establishing boundaries with our kids. Charity is the director of preschool ministry at First Baptist Church in Starkville, Mississippi, and she studied Christian education at Gateway Seminary. Let's see what Charity had to say about establishing firm rules and boundaries.
Can you share with us, Charity, just thinking about, I know you said your kids are older, but you're still children's minister, and so how in your home and in your work have you established boundaries for kids?
Well, I think the onset, we did set boundaries, like in our home. We did have very specific rules and very specific things that we wanted accomplished in the lives of our children, very specific, not only behaviors, but relationships that we wanted to cultivate with them. And so we set some rules and some guidelines up very early on, I mean almost from day one with them, of expectations. You know, like it was an expectation that we would all sit down to dinner together every night. It was an expectation that we would eat breakfast together every morning.
Oh, wow.
We did that pretty consistently. When we would go places, there was an expectation of how they would behave and how they would interact with themselves and with others and with our family. And then we also set pretty clearly consequences that would happen if they did not meet those expectations. And we really tried to the best of our ability to follow through. So if we said, you know what, we're going to a restaurant and this is what we expect you to do, and we want you to engage with us and talk with us, and electronics are going to go in the pockets or in my purse, and we're gonna spend this time together, and if we don't, you know what, the next time we go out for dinner, you're not gonna come with us. And so we were really pretty clear with what we expected and with the consequences, and we were really pretty good at following through with
That's good.
how
So,
we expected.
What I've heard you say several times is following through.
Yes.
And so if you have an expectation, you have to hold up that expectation. That's actually a good reminder. I think sometimes as parents, like we want to say like we do this or we do that, but we don't hold our kids to that. What would be some examples of how you followed through?
Well, curfews, especially as our children got older and wanted to go to friends and wanted to do things, especially if they were old enough to drive, if they missed their curfew when they were supposed to be home, they weren't allowed to drive the car for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And we made that pretty clear. You lose the car keys for 2 weeks if you aren't home in time.
Okay, so that was a good motivation to be home.
It was usually a very good motivation. Now, usually the garage door was going up at exactly 10 o'clock, but they met that expectation. They came in, they may have been a little bit mad because they had to leave when everything was going on and they were having so much fun, but they knew.
Well, one of the struggles that I have with my children, and I know that a lot of the parents who will watch this video have, as well as probably many parents in your church have, is the struggle with technology and boundaries today. So do you have any words of wisdom on how to establish boundaries in the world of electronics and technology?
I'd like to say it ends when your sons get to be 20 and 21 and 22, but from the onset, when they were younger, when they first got their phones, I think they were like the last people in their classes and in their groups of friends because they didn't get them until like they were 12. We set up some parameters with them. You know, they initially got phones that they could only call and text on, and we set up some parameters within the phone itself and within our phone plan that after 9 o'clock at night, there were no outgoing or ingoing texts, and that was set up in the electronics of the phone itself. During the school day, the only people that they could text or call, and it better be a good emergency, was my husband and I. They didn't get smartphones until they were into high school. And again, we put on some parameters of what websites they could visit, and again, with texting and some guidelines with texting and who they could call during school hours, and then during the night hours. They couldn't, I mean, they were still 18 and living at our house, and they couldn't text anybody or receive texts after 10 o'clock at night.
Okay, so you kept it.
So we kept that, I mean, even through their high school years, just because we know that sleep is important. And there were times that they found workarounds for that, and their phones went out to the kitchen to charge at night for several occasions. So we were pretty consistent on that, but we also gave them phones with the understanding that these are tools, they are not yours. At any time, we can pick them up. We can look at your messages, who you've been talking to, who you've been texting with, what websites you've been visiting. We just had to stay on top of the technology, understanding that, you know, these are tools. These are not bad things, but it is a privilege to use it and to have it. So
there's a lot of power in electronics.
There is a lot of power in electronics, and we wanted to put some safeguards in place so that it wasn't abused.
Sure.
And we were those mean parents.
Well, I think that we have to be.
We have to be.
So, just like God does, He has to punish us when we disobey Him. Sometimes those boundaries are established and then crossed.
Of course.
So how did you discipline in a godly manner? Like, how did you, when you discipline your kids or when they cross those boundaries, did you include an element, a spiritual element, or was it more of just a personal element? Did you explain to your kids from a biblical perspective why those boundaries?
There were times, because sometimes they would like tell a lie. All kids do at times. And I would say, you know, guys, you're better than this. You've made a profession of faith, you're following God, and yet you know that God has set in His laws that lying is not good, and you've just told me a lie. And trying to draw it back to their faith is really key and crucial, in telling them, you know, you're better than this. As they became older, pointing them back to their profession of faith and saying, you've made a profession of faith, this is the expectation that God has for you, to live out your faith. And yes, it doesn't mean that we're always going to be perfect, but this is the standard, and this is what you want to be striving for. And so there have been times that we've had to say, you're better than this, and this is why, because you are God's child.
Right.
And you need to realize that you have a lot of impact around the people around you.
Right.
And your friends, and they know that you're a Christian, and you really do, even though it's hard, want to be the example.
That's a great word. And just like with everything, I'm sure times that you had grace with your kids and you showed them grace. And so I think it's important to establish boundaries, but then also balance that with grace and love and mercy, just like Jesus has done with us.
And there have been times we've said to our kids, you really deserve this, and we know you deserve this punishment because we told you we're going to. But I will say, there were times we've said, you are going to get a lesson in grace today, and I am not going to go on with this punishment that I said I would.
Sure.
You know, I will say that. There were times that we said, you're getting a lesson in grace today, because what we really should be doing is this punishment. But, you know, sometimes it was natural consequences. They got in trouble at school, and they got punished at school, and usually that meant a punishment at school and a punishment at home. But what they got at school was enough.
Yeah.
And when they got home, it was, you know what, I think we're going to just hold off and say that was enough.
That's cool. Cool. Well, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you sharing some of your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Discipline is never fun, but parents must help their children understand that there are real-world consequences for rules that are broken. Proverbs 10:17 says, "The one who follows instruction is on the path to life, but the one who rejects correction goes astray." I encourage all of us to look at our family's rules and boundaries this week. Use them to speak life into your family because your family matters. If you liked what you heard today, please let us know. Press the like button and give us a thumbs up. Share this video on social media and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep you in the loop for new episode releases. We do what we do to help you with what you do.